Good evening, good night, everybody. This is this is our final show for the evening, and this is the last show for the Astronomy at the Beach 2020. I hope you've enjoyed everything up to date. There's been a lot of variation, a lot of really cool content. Some of it's been delivered by us, some has been delivered by other astronomy clubs, and some of it has actually been delivered by some of our fantastic guest speakers and keynote speakers. So our last event was supposed to be a live show of the night sky, but the clouds and the sky are not going to cooperate with us tonight. So we have a backup. As always, in Michigan, you always have to have a backup. And our backup tonight is actually the same. Gordon is actually, instead of showing the night sky, Gordon is actually going to take us through the steps he uses to process images that he's taken in his astrophotography. And I believe, if I'm correct, I believe we're actually going to walk through the process of processing the Andromeda galaxy, which is M31. So without further ado, Gordon, I would like to hand it over to you. Thank you.
Okay, Liam, thank you. Just one small correction. In the last minute scramble here to get ready for this change in plan, we're not doing M42. We're gonna do M33. We had some technical difficulties that needed to be handled. But with that,
it will all be fantastic. We don't care.
It's still a galaxy. So let me share my screen here, and we'll get going here. So you can see on the screen, well, welcome everybody to tonight's show. If you're returning from last night, welcome back. If you're new to tonight, this is like Liam said, we're going to do some processing because the Michigan Nebula has reappeared and we're not going to see any stars tonight. So as you can see, I've scratched out live stacking of tonight's skies, and I've done an image processing overview. So with that, let's get started. Okay, this is what I would have started with anyway, but I think just to give you a feel for what kind of equipment is involved and what I'm using, at least for this round of images. This is my observatory in my yard. It's a dome made by Technical Innovations called the Home Dome. It's 10 foot in diameter. As with a lot of people, I got this used about 5 or 6 years ago. So it's been around since the late 90s, I think it was originally purchased. Anyway, that's immaterial. Inside is the current rig that I'm using. The mount is an equatorial mount. It's a Losmandy G11. That's probably the most frequently used mount for astrophotography by amateurs. The way this mount works is, and you can see this arrow I put here. This axis of the telescope, you point at the celestial North Pole in our case. If you were down in Australia or New Zealand or someplace on the other side of the equator, you'd point it at the celestial South Pole. And the point of this is that this thing will rotate around this axis to counteract the rotation of the Earth. So it's important to get that thing as accurately aligned as possible. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. What's mounted on the rig right now is a Stellarvue SDQ100. It's a 100 millimeter refractor. It's a 580 millimeter focal length. And if you were listening to the previous show, it sounded like John is using telephoto lenses that are longer than my telescope. So that's, I thought, was kind of an interesting counterpoint for those who saw it.
Gordon, do you still have your Ritchie Chrétien?
Oh yes, okay. I switch off depending on the season, and actually, I think after this weekend this comes down, and we'll put the other telescope up because I want to start getting into some planetary stuff and grab Mars as it comes to opposition here in the next 2 weeks. So anyway, it's a 100 millimeter refractor, and mounted on it is my imaging scope is a Canon 6D DSLR. It's essentially a consumer grade camera, although it has been modified, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next few minutes. And then sitting on top of it is another telescope. In this case, it's a Williams 66, another refractor. And this is my guide scope. This scope is what I use to take the pictures. And the ones we're going to look at tonight, we're taking through this scope. This scope is used to keep the telescope pointing where it's meant to be going. Let me get to the next slide and we'll talk a little bit more about it. So again, this is another picture of the imaging camera. Again, it's a Canon 6D full frame. For those who into DSLRs, whatever, and point and shoot, back in the day when we had film, 35 millimeter film cameras, where the film itself was a 35 by 24 millimeter negative or slide, however you want to, depending on what you were using in those days, for those old enough to remember those kind of things. Most DSLRs today are called APS-C chips, and they have a slightly smaller chip. They're 24 by 18, if I've got my numbers right. Astrophotographers use all kinds of cameras. This is maybe a more economical or a more affordable way to get started, but it's got some issues. Most dedicated astrophotography cameras are actually cooled so that you keep the sensor cold and keep heat signal from building up. And we're going to talk about that briefly as we get into what goes into processing. And the other camera I'm showing here is the camera that's on the guide scope, and this is a Starlight Express Lodestar X2. This is an extremely sensitive chip on here. Because what I need to do is I need to find a star, and sometimes we're pointing in parts of the sky that are not star rich. And so the only thing that's going to be available is a relatively dim star. So I need something that's going to be sensitive enough to find that star, and I can have enough signal to it that I can guide on. Now, a rig like I showed you can start getting a little bit pricey. Excuse me. Look, rule of thumb has been that the telescope mount should be 2/3 of the cost of your entire rig. That's a good way to maybe start talking about how you allocate your budget. The reality is, by the time you start getting into higher end cameras and things, that 2/3 probably goes away. But you need to invest, if you're going to do deep sky astrophotography, you need a mount that's going to track very accurately so that you don't wind up with football shaped stars. And that's part of the reason for the guide camera. Now that can, especially in the beginning, it becomes a tough pill to swallow. So there's other ways to go. This is a sky adventure. It's essentially another equatorial mount. It's only got rotation around the right ascension axis. But you can see I've got a DSLR mounted on it with a zoom lens. This type of thing is relatively inexpensive, a couple of $300 for the mount. But this, with a telephoto lens and this type of mount, you can do some really nice nightscapes and imaging of constellations and things, and this will track just fine for that type of work. So if you want to get started, part of the things you can do is start doing at the shorter focal length, more forgiving end of the spectrum, and certainly more affordable at that end. Okay, I talked about the Canon camera being modified, and we'll give you quickly what's involved with that. This red curve that you see here is the typical frequency response or band pass for a consumer grade camera. And you can see it starts at about 400 nanometers, which is deep in the blue into the ultraviolet range. It rises up, and when you get above 575, it starts tailing off. And by the time you get to 700 nanometers, there's no light getting through. What's important about these numbers is the human eye is sensitive from about 400 to 700 nanometers. This is infrared in this region. This is ultraviolet down here. And this curve, in some respects, mimics the frequency response of the human eye. And that's kind of part of the reason why consumer grade cameras will use this kind of a bandpass. Now, the problem with that is that if you've seen astrophotos, you see all the rich red colors and things coming from emissions nebula, Orion Nebula. There's all kinds of things that show off these pretty red colors. Most of that red light is coming from emission of something called hydrogen alpha. I think Tim probably did a talk earlier on spectroscopy and talked about hydrogen alpha and excited hydrogen gas. I don't know if everybody saw that, but in any case, hydrogen gas out in space, excited by bright new stars, will get the hydrogen excited and it will start glowing red, and that's what that red color is. And that's right at this this wavelength. And so you can see a consumer grade camera, it's chopping that off. And you're only getting about 25% of the light that you'd like to get through to the sensor. So by modifying it, and that's what's done to this camera, we've now extended this thing right up to 700 millimeters. So all of that hydrogen alpha light can get through to the sensor. So that's, now just to show you why that's important, this is 2 shots of the Crab Nebula. This first one is actually one of my first astrophotos I took a bunch of years ago, and I did it with a Canon 20D DSLR that was unmodified, and you can see the Crab Nebula is mostly blue with just a string of red in it. Soon after this picture was taken, I got a modified DSLR that allowed the hydrogen alpha through, and now look at what happens to the color of that of the Crab Nebula. It turned red, and this red color is more what you see if you go search in the internet for images of the Crab Nebula. So that's why it's important for an astrophotography, for deep space stuff, to get that modified camera. For dedicated astrophotographers, for cameras, I should say, this is not a problem at all. They don't have that problem. They're typically using a monochrome camera with separate red, green, and blue filters, and they're getting all this just automatically. So, so this becomes important with a DSLR. Okay, I know I'm going to a lot of the grass here in details, but we wanted to get into processing, and I wanted to make sure you had some feel for some of the terminology that's going to come up. In a single shot color, the image that gets taken by the camera is actually monochrome. The sensors can only see the amount of light hitting them. And in a consumer grade camera, what you're actually doing is they put little tiny red pixels in front of some pixels, green in some others, and blue in front of others. And they form what is typically called a Bayer matrix. So you'll get an array of blue, green, blue, green, blue, green, and the next row will have green, red, green, red. When you take the image, let's just take this red pixel here, this R1, I've got the red value, but I have no idea what the blue and green value would be for that pixel because I had a red filter in front of it. So in a very, very simplistic processing step, what you'll do is you'll take the 4 surrounding green pixels and average them together and say that would be the green value for that pixel. And likewise, I would take the 4 surrounding blue pixels on the diagonal, and that would become the blue value. This is highly simplistic. There's a lot more technology goes into this, but that's the essence of what's going on with these cameras. Now, this is all kinds of words here, and I really don't want to get caught up in the words too much, but we're going to talk about image calibration. But essentially, when we're going to take an astrophoto, because we're taking very, very low light images for very long periods of time. When you do a snapshot in your backyard, you're probably at 125th of a second or 250th of a second. It's really short. I'm taking astrophotos, and the ones we were taking tonight were 30 seconds. So think about how much longer 30 seconds is versus 125th. So we take a lot longer exposures, and unfortunately, you can start building up a heat signature onto the chip at the same time you're building up a light signature. So we need to be able to compensate for that, and that's part of what the calibration is. So essentially what I got to do is I got to take the light frame, and I need to take away the dark signature that gets there because of the heat signature that builds up even without any light hitting it, and that's called the dark frame. And then there's some inconsistencies in the uniformity of the exposure that you'd never see in a light frame, you know, a snapshot, but really show up in astrophotos. And that's what's called the flat is. So I'm taking a light frame and I subtract a dark and a bias out of it, and then I divide it by a flat, and that's essentially the calibration. And that's probably a whole lot more math than you ever wanted to know, and I really wanted to get into. Okay, so let me enough for the
so Gordon, quick question. I assume that later on you're going to show what an image fresh out of the camera with no stretching looks like, and they're going to see utter blackness.
You are a good shill, my friend.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Because here is that image sitting right here in front of us. So what we're going to do is show a processing of M33, the Triangulum galaxy.
Gordon, how much did you pay him to say that?
This is
it doesn't look like it, but this is an image rich in data.
Okay. So this is the image right out of the camera. And is everybody overwhelmed with the amount of detail we see here? So you're starting to get an expression of what's involved with these images. Now, this was relatively short. I've been amazed over the last week to get ready for this. These were only 30-second exposures. I would normally been out for this thing. I would have been taking 8-minute exposures. So this is significantly shorter than I've been used to doing. Well, let me just blow this up a little bit, and you'll see what happens as we get into the detail here. Okay. And now as I go in, you can start seeing the individual pixels, and you can see that checkerboard. And that's the red, green, blue, green matrix that's still sitting there because this is still just a monochrome image. Okay. The other things I want to point out on this thing quickly, and the reason why we're doing the calibration is, for one thing, you can see up in the corners tend to be darker than the centers. That's called vignetting. It happens to every picture you take and every camera. Again, in daylight exposures, you don't notice it because you've got so much light, but the reality is less light gets to the corners than it does to the center, and you wind up with this gradual fading off of the intensity. The other thing that happens here is things that you don't really notice so much in the daytime is that dust gets onto the sensors, okay? And most of the time it gets swamped, but if you look at this image, and I'm gonna come in here tight, I think I went too far. Let me go back down. Here's one. You can see these dark spots here. You can see how this area here, this little round thing, is darker than the surrounding area. That's dust on the sensor, and it causes, because the light can't get through the dust, so that area gets a little bit less exposure. And when I magnify this stuff, that can start making the image look pretty ugly. The other thing is, you'll see down here in the corner, down this bottom edge, what I actually just recently confirmed, what I've got is there's a hairline scratch on the cover plate on top of my sensor. I've had this camera for about 5 years, and I always thought that was a piece of lint stuck on the edge. And I recently realized that nope, it's an actual scratch on the sensor. So I get that little black spot all the time. And you can also notice at the bottom, there's a dark line, and that's because there's a piece of foam rubber on the inside side of the camera. I think it's to keep the mirror from making too much noise. And that's actually blocking some light from getting through. So all this stuff is defects in the image that we want to get rid of, and that's done through the image calibration process. So, and I'm not going to do it because it'll take too much time, but what I've done ahead of time here is I've run something called a weighted batch pre-processing script. This, by the way, is a piece of software called PixInsight. It's a piece of software dedicated to image processing of astrophotos. For those of it's not inexpensive, but it's worth every dime you spend on it. This has got more tools built into this thing than I think it's. I barely know 10–15% of the capabilities of this, and I've been using it for about 4 years. It's just a wealth of tools. But essentially what I do is I put in to this thing all my bias frames, my dark frames, my flat frames, and my light frames. And it will go through and do that calibration on every one of the images. In this case, it was, I think I did 40 frames that I stuck into this. So it goes ahead and cranks all that math for all 40. This thing also actually then takes a look at the image and does an evaluation of the quality of every image and looks at things at how big the stars are in each frame, what the signal to noise ratio is on average, and looks at the eccentricity of the stars and comes up with a quality rating for each image. And then based on that quality image, it then puts a weighting factor on how when it stacks the images. That's more than we need to know now. So the output of this is a stacked image. Let me just back up again. The other night, if you were here yesterday, we did a series of live stacking with 30-second exposures, and this is the kind of image we got out of that for M33. And you can see, the non-evenness on the side, and there's I live in a light polluted zone, so there's a lot of wash coming in from the side. So this was the image we had last night. I now took the images and passed them through the utility that I just showed you, which does all that calibration. And last night we talked a little bit about when I do the stacking for real, it's a more sophisticated algorithm that helps get rid of some defects in the image that the other one didn't. So just to show what this was, let me bring this image up. And you see this little box here. I put a frame around that area, and this is what's inside that frame. And you see these red circles, those were hot pixels that were moving around as we took images. And so those are all defects in the image. And they got left in that stacked image because the rejection algorithm weren't being used. Now, if I go in here, the one I just stacked here, let me stretch it here, sorry. Now you can see that same area, and that is gone. So those defects that were in this image are now totally missing from this one. So that's part of the advantage of using the more sophisticated processing tools, is some defects that get into the image get removed during that image calibration and stacking routine. Okay, so now we got an image. What do we do with it? So actually, I've already taken this image and did the processing, but one of the nice things with PixInsight is that you can actually save the history of what you've done. So there's a little thing here called the History Explorer here, and if I go in here and put in, you can see this history here. These are all the steps I did in the processing of this image, and that we're going to go through here one step at a time. So we start out with
Gordon. So far you've acquired your data, and now you've just showed us that you've pre-processed your data with the image integration, right, and the calibration. And so now you finally have you finished all your pre-processing steps. Right. Now is where it gets fun.
Well, yeah, I think this is fun. I guess it's an opinion here. But remember, now this is now a stack of 40 images that were, where the stars were aligned so that all the stars sat on top of one another, and then the 40 images were then stacked and averaged together to form one new image. And the advantage of doing that is as you stack, there's noise in the background. Let's bring this up now. And you can see the amount of speckling that's going on in the backyard. background. That's noise. You know, the background here should have been just nice black sky. Well, it's not. As we stack, it would have been worse before. And as we stack images, the amount of the noise gets reduced by the square root of the number of images I take. And as we talked a little bit last night, if I take 4 images, I reduce the noise by half. If I take 9, I reduce it by a third. By 3, if I do 16, it's by 4, et cetera, et cetera. So, but it's still, you know, here's 40 and there's still noise here. And we're going to stretch these things. We're going to pull this stuff up, and all that stuff, if we leave it there, it's going to make this thing look pretty ugly. So the first thing we did here is I'm going to crop this image down a little bit because you can see the junk on the sides. There's things in here that are, especially in that stacking, the images are moving around from one another. You leave black bands on the edges, and there's debris left at the edges of the frame that we really don't need and we want to get rid of. So my first thing to do is I do a crop, and I cut.
Did you mention dithering with the guider?
Okay, I'm sorry, I did not.
Okay.
Thank you. When I was imaging every one of those images, the guide camera would take, after an image moved, it would literally artificially tell the computer that, no, the star's in a different spot. And it would then slide the telescope over by 1 or 2 pixels. And then once the thing settled down, it would then take the image. And then it would take another one and move it in another direction. And that's what was causing that array of hotspots there. And that's part of the reason why we got to go back in a line, because we've actually moved the stars around and now we got to bring them back. But when we do that, all those spots get moved to different spots, and then they're in single places. So the image rejection routine can get rid of them easier. So anyway, we've now cropped the image and got rid of some of the junk on the side. The next thing I'm going to do is called the dynamic background extraction. You can see the unevenness in this image. You know, I got a lot of lightness over here. It's darker over in the corner. I'm in light polluted skies, and the sky is not uniformly lit because there's light coming off of the truck stop that's, you know, a mile or so away from me, and it's filling the sky up with light bubbles. So this dynamic background extraction, I tell it where the sky should be background, and it goes in and tries to, it creates a surface that it subtracts out to try and get rid of that non-uniformity. And oh, by the way, just let me show you something else. If I unstretch this, by the way, this image is still pretty dark. I mean, that's the level that we're seeing here on the screen. The reality is, if I stretch it now, I'm doing something called a screen stretch. Let me bring this onto the screen. When I do this, you'll see this thing is all green. Wait a second, where did the green come from? It turns out in this camera, the green is more sensitive than the red and blue channels. And if I do nothing else, it makes everything look green. When I do a stretch with this thing turned off, it then makes a separate stretch for each one and kind of helps to neutralize it somewhat. Okay. So my next step here is going to be something called a dynamic background extraction. Like I said, it's going to try and create a surface on the image and get rid of those non-uniformity in appearance. And it's also at the same time going to try and even out the 3 channels. So we did that, and you can see how the thing changed its appearance. And now even when I turn this thing back on, I have now got an image that is that total green color is gone, and you can see a lot of that non-uniformity has been removed. You can still a lot of hash in the background, but that overall non-uniformity and illumination has been taken out of the image. Okay, still not looking very good. By the way, everything that we've done so far has taken me a lot longer to explain than it ever would have taken to actually do. Now, the next thing that needs to be done is I need to calibrate the colors on this. This is something that happens inside your camera automatically. It's by settings set by the manufacturer. But I need to go set a 0 point, so to speak, or dark zone that says, if you get on your bathroom scale, you need to set it to 0 before you get on, right? You don't want to be showing 20 pounds. It'll tell you you're 20 pounds heavier. So I got to set the background to something called 0, or the black level. And then I also want to find something that's pure white, and I want to turn that white. So I'm going to change the color balance of the image. Again, that happens automatically in your consumer cameras. So this process takes 4 or 5 minutes. And again, I've already done it. So we're going to just get to the end result here. This process, by the way, the one I'm using is called a photometric color calibration. And what it does is it's going to go look at this image and actually find out exactly where in the sky this image is. If you were here last night and you showed me doing plate solving when I was trying to align the image, this is doing the same thing, and it is now identifying all the stars in this image. It now knows what every one of these stars are, okay? And it can look up those stars in a catalog and look at their color coordinates that have been established by scientific methods. And then it looks at what's in this image and looks at what the true color is, and it correlates the two and comes up with a correction factor. Okay, so that got done. And so now this is the color calibrated image. You can see a little bit of green that was in the image in the galaxy is gone. I think I kept the I thought I kept the calibration curves in here someplace, but I don't know what I do with them. Okay, I don't see them sitting here right now. Okay, so now we've got something that's been color calibrated. Now, I did something here just because look at the length. This is the name of the image and it's a mouthful, and it gets crazy when you're trying to keep track of things. So I went in there and I just changed it, said this was M33 and it was 30 seconds, just to make it a little easy to remember. And then the next thing I did, you'll see there's a TVG denoise. For those who were here last night, I was using something called an easy stacker as part of this easy processing script. What part of this package is another thing called easy denoise. And it's another nifty process that automates the process of trying to get rid of some of this background noise in the system that the stacking didn't get rid of. So I'm going to blow this up so you can see how the effectiveness of this. So it actually does two things. The first one, it's called a TGV denoise. And so it does that, and you can see how that thing settled down a bit. And then it's going to do a multi-scale median transfer. Don't ask me to explain. This is rocket scientist over my head. I press the buttons, it works. I'm good. I'm good with that. So I do this one and it gets a little bit better yet. Okay. So we've managed to color calibrate it, and we've gotten rid of a lot of the noise that's in the background of this thing. Now, I just did another thing here. I just assigned this thing so that this thing is now assigned a color profile of sRGB. So you don't need to worry about that at this point. That was the next thing I did. Okay. At this point, this image is still what we'd call a linear image. It's exactly as it came out of the camera, except for the denoise. It's still very dark. It's certainly not something we want to hang on our wall. So we now got to do what's called a nonlinear stretch. We want to now start to bring this thing out so we can really start to see what's in the background. First thing I had to do is this screen stretch that I was using. And by the way, this was only brightening it so that I could see it on the screen. I was not touching the underlying data of this at all. So I'm turning this off. And then I'm going to use something called arc sine stretch. This is another mathematical thing that you need to go get your math degree to totally understand, but it's an effective way of doing a stretch. And so I'm going to go do that now. And I intentionally didn't stretch this very far. You can see that the stars have just come out, but not much more. If I actually put a screen stretch on this again, you'll see that the galaxies in the background there. But I've only brought it up so that the stars have started to be seen, because now I'm going to start doing some real magic. The next thing I would run on this thing is something called StarNet. And what this StarNet is a little utility that's available out on the internet, and best of all, it's free. And this routine works the magic, because what it does is I ran it on. I took this image and ran it. And oops, let me get this here. Roll this one back now. I should have. No stars. I want to roll this back to where it was when I first did it. Okay. What I did is I ran StarNet on it, and I pulled all the stars out. I left the rest of it there. I stretch this right now. You'll see the galaxy is there, and the really bright stars, the residuals of that still sitting in there, but the stars have been removed. So at this point, the next thing I did was I took this image and subtracted this image from it, and what am I left with? The stars. So I then wind up with another image, and I should roll this one backwards. And this one has nothing but the stars in it. So now I have an image with stars, and I've got an image with no stars. So let's go back to this one, and we'll start processing this. So I changed the name again, and now I'm going to start stretching this. And this time, by the way, I put a mask on it. If you're familiar with Photoshop and masking, let me show you what the mask on this thing looks like. Everything that's red now gets protected from what I do. What is not red, where there's no color at all, whatever I do gets the full amount applied to. And if I've got shades of gray or less, something in between full red and nothing, I get a gradual change in how effective or how strong an effect I get from the operation. So here's the mask with the mask on, and now I'm gonna do some more processing on it. For one thing, one of the things that comes out of these DSLRs, especially mine, is you tend to get this green cast that doesn't want to go away. So there's a nice little tool built in here called SCNR that preferentially gets rid of some of the green stuff. So you can see when I apply it, that green color kind of disappears. So another magic tool. And by the way, the reason I'm doing this is I want to be able to stretch that galaxy in the background and bring it out. But if I did it with the stars in there, I'd make the stars go huge and get bloated and look ugly. So by doing this in two separate operations, I can leave the stars alone and do the galaxy separately, and then we're going to wind up putting them back together. So there's first stretch, and now a couple of more. I'm doing some more stretching. This is where the artistry comes into this. This HDR transform, you can see what happens here. Here's before, and you can see the core is kind of pretty burned out. And if I keep stretching this, the core is going to go white, and I'm going to lose detail. So this HDR multi-scale transform selectively knocks that really bright thing down and allows to get a more uniform luminance intensity, so I can start stretching this more without blowing out the center. This histogram is I'm doing a bit of sharpening and brightening at different scales. This first one was at a pretty fine scale, and the next one is at a coarser scale. So I'm bringing up the intensity and detail into in these areas. And all the time I've got this mask on, so all this stuff in the back here is not being affected at all. Some more curves to play with the levels. And this is all, now it's all artistry. We're out here just trying to make pretty pictures and what starts to look good. So I probably did it again just to bring out some more of the outside of this. I think I brought the saturation up. I think I was starting to play with trying to do some things to bring the blues back out in the outer parts of the galaxy. Probably did it again. And now that's as far as I went with this image at this point. So there's M33 without stars. Let me get rid of some of this stuff and get it out of here. Now, here's the stars. So here was the stars, and I actually only did, I hit that arc sign, stretched to it again, and brought the stars up. That's all I did to the stars. I did one more operation. So that the stars have been brought up brighter, but they've not become monstrously bloated animals. So now we do something, we put them back together again. If you're used to Photoshop, you know that you can blend layers doing different kind of blending levels. One of them is called something called screen, and it's duplicated as a thing in PixInsight called Pixel Math, where I can do mathematical on two images in a math program, so to speak. And so this is essentially, I'm taking the image with the galaxy and the images with the stars, and I'm running in what would be in Photoshop a screen overlay. And when I do that, I get this. So now I put the stars and the galaxy back together, but still not totally happy. How much time we got here? We're running. I still got noise in the background. So my next step here actually was to take this thing and bring it into Photoshop. I think I got Photoshop open here. So
you're the last show of the day, Gordon, so you can take whatever time you need.
Okay, so here's the image as we brought it into, I gotta remember I'm doing a different program, so I gotta do things differently. Here's that image that we brought in. You can see the background is looking pretty noisy. Okay, so for the astrophotographers out there who have not discovered this next tool, I'm gonna show you what I think is something pretty remarkable. I see Ani's on here. I'm pretty sure he knows Topaz. This is called Topaz denoise. Okay. This line here, to the right, the software has been applied, to the left, it hasn't. So I'll take this thing up and I'm going to do a little more heavier noise reduction. Again, you can see how this thing is getting smoother. I think there's some color noise, that the color is kind of moving around. So I'm going to hit this thing with a bit of color denoise and smooth that out a little bit. So I'll probably hit this a little bit heavier. So now you can see what happens between
this software keeps amazing.
with and without the noise reduction. Okay, so I just now simply apply this. By the way, I've done this on all kinds of snapshots. taking pictures with your iPhone or your cell phone, and especially in low light conditions, and they get grainier than heck, and bring them in here, man. It snaps them right out. This is a wonderful piece of software. I'm sounding like a shill for them.
Are they paying you royalties?
Actually, if you buy it right now, it's on sale. It's normally $79, and it's on sale for $59 through the first week in October.
Sorry, which software is on sale?
Yeah, the software keep amazes me every time.
Now, I think my impression is it's a yearly subscription, by the way. So they're going to nick me again next year. So anyway, I actually did that on the image, and I did some other changes to it. I did some more sharpening in here, but now you can see the background. The background here is now pretty nice compared to what it was. So that's image. I think I also this thing has messed up my history.
So Gordon, one general comment that you've made to me. So folks, everything that I know about astrophotography, I learned from Gordon. So you can blame him for all my bad work. One valuable comment that you made to me was that when you're working in PixInsight, powerful as it is, you can't use your mouse or stylus and say, only do something on this little piece of the image unless you can algorithmically, using math, create a mask. But in Photoshop, you can pick and choose.
Amen.
Yeah, okay.
Amen. That's been the downside of PixInsight. And quite frankly, the developers, I think, are totally resisting because when you start painting on masks, I think there's some trepidation that you're now you're modifying things in a way that wouldn't be totally natural. We can get into a whole philosophy and what's going too far with image manipulation. Certainly, painting in a face someplace that isn't there would be I think we'd be crossing the line. But there is no the masking capabilities in PixInsight are rudimentary. Let me go back in because so we can compare what we had. This is the final one out of Photoshop that I brought in here just so we can see do a comparison side by side of them. I want to blow up. We'll do it. Anyway, for 30-second exposures, I think this thing turned out pretty well.
And for contrast, can you pop up
red? I'm sorry?
For contrast purposes, can you pop up what your live, do you still have what your live stacking was, unprocessed data? So you can show, the before and after. Yeah, there you go. So that turned into that.
So I don't know, it took us the better part, almost an hour. I would guess that the real-time processing of this probably took me about an hour and a half, hour and 3/4 in real time. So it wasn't much different than me trying to talk my way through it here.
Tell everyone about the power of the computer that you use to do this.
Well, when you're doing a whole lot of images, things tend to go slow. This is an i9 processor, so I've got 16 threads running, and I got 84 gigabytes of RAM in here, and I've got I'm going to forget the initials. My hard drive is now not wired into it with a wire to the motherboard. It's plugged into the PCI slot. So I forgot the terminology for that. So it's
an NVMe solid state hard drive.
Yeah.
Or an NVMe, one or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I should mention that not all software is very good at taking advantage of all of the threads on the processor cores. PixInsight is outstanding. So when you buy a high-end computer with lots of processor cores and multi-threading, there are parts of the operation where if you're watching the CPU graphs, you'll watch everything you own go to 100%.
I have seen my computer RAM with 12 processors. So with hyper-threading turn on is 24 threads running and 128 gigs of memory, and it uses every bit of it.
Yeah, it definitely gives you your money worth on your hardware.
Yeah, I have a full-blown server I use for imaging processing, and it eats it up. It does it fast, but it eats it up.
Okay, just another case where fast computers become important. And again, thank you, Ani, because Ani was the one who pointed us to it. That StarNet process. Before Ani's showed us the way to an acceleration, to do that StarNet trip on a photo like this took just under 10 minutes to crank through and separate the stars away from the image. The speed trick that Ani showed us is it moves the processing for that from the CPU to the GPU card, and that then now took me an hour and 1 minute and 18 seconds to do the same thing that it took just under 10 minutes beforehand.
Yeah, so a computer with a gaming video card, the more powerful the video card for like a gaming video card.
The only way it works is an NVIDIA card.
Yeah, but you can get high-end NVIDIA gaming cards, and the high-end NVIDIA gaming cards really has so much GPU power, and it is all graphical. So the more GPUs actually process data faster than the CPU does.
Oh, by far, yeah, they specialize in floating point.
Yeah.
So Gordon, and maybe Ani as well, can you plug the URLs into the chat for your AstroBin?
Oh, okay. I don't even know what it is. Let me go pull it up.
Yeah, just paste it in chat here, and then we'll paste it into the live chat on YouTube so everyone else can see and follow you.
So for folks that are watching, if you're interested in astrophotography, super valuable. You know, you can look at pretty pictures on the web, but AstroBin is a website. You know, think of it like a Flickr or the Instagram or whatever. It's a website where people post photos, except they're all astrophotographers, and most of them will tell you what equipment they use, how they process their stuff, how they took their exposures, and so it's a huge wealth of information. Whenever I want to go image an object that I've never imaged before, I go find somebody else who did it first on AstroBin. I find a good-looking example, and I see what settings they used.
Okay, where do I find the chat?
It's in the bottom of the window. If you don't see it there should be a more with 3 buttons, but it should be in the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, wiggle your mouse.
I'm still sharing. Maybe
it's because he's sharing his screen. He probably
stop sharing temporarily, grab it and paste it in there. And Ani, since you do some as well, if you have an AstroBin, please place it into the chat, and we'll share it with everyone so people can actually go follow your work.
So now you should see a chat if you wiggle your mouse at the bottom, Gordon, the bottom of your Zoom window. You'll see chat. Click on chat, and then you can paste the link in there.
Okay, I got it, Tim.
And now you can reshare your screen and.
But let me do something else here too. Let's because if people want to go see another great site.
Well, Gordon, right. Only if you're there, and if you have an AstroBin or something like that, you'd like people to.
Yeah, it's in chat. It's in chat, Liam. He already posted it.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I thought I missed it. Here, I go paste out yours as well.
So Gordon and Ani, we didn't properly introduce Ani, but they are both members of a Plymouth astrophotography group. And some of these guys are, actually most of these guys are amazing. I hope that someday I can do stuff that is even half as good as some of these guys in that group. And honestly, if you've never done astrophotography before and you can find an organization that does astrophotography, it really jumpstarts how much your knowledge.
Go ahead, Ani.
I'm also going to put the link to the Plymouth Groups IO.
Yeah, okay, yeah, do the groups at IO, and yeah, I'll post it up there. I got it.
The Plymouth group meets the first Tuesday of each month. Before COVID, we met at the Plymouth Library in downtown Plymouth, but we've now been virtual now for the last 5 months, whatever it is. And actually,
yeah.
some of us actually think the virtual is more is better because we have access to everything on our desk while we're talking on the line. So it's a
You may stay virtual.
the dues for the Plymouth Astrophotography Club are reasonable, $0. So
Expensive.
so anybody who'd like to just to come out, join in, you're more than welcome.
So guys, is that all you have, Gordon?
Well, that was the formal part. I don't know if
If anyone has any questions for Gordon, please type them into the chat.
Yeah, I was just going to inject a couple of things, right? So it seems so intimidating, right? It doesn't have to be intimidating. Everybody had to start not knowing anything, and God knows I've made a lot of mistakes. Just a camera and a tripod and a wide angle lens, and you don't need expensive equipment. And then if you get an ordinary photo tripod with a tracking head, and you polar align it, and you don't even have to have an auto guider, and then you get even better data. And then, as you build, you can get into, oh, now I finally own an equatorial mount, and now I have a guide, a guide scope and a guide camera. And you don't have to swallow the elephant in one bite. Gordon is just showing you how far you can go if you really decide to plunge in on the deep end.
Yeah, and there's a comment there about it that someone's in overload. Yeah, well, yes, but the good thing is this is on YouTube. You can come back to it whenever you want to revise it. All of the events from this whole weekend, from all day yesterday and today, are all on YouTube. So you can go out there, go back over the recordings, pick up new tips, stuff that you've missed. We all miss stuff when we were watching live. So, and there's clubs you can reach out to join those clubs and those groups, and you can actually learn from them as well.
And if you're a parent, Liam, if you're a parent and you want to keep your kids out of trouble.
Oh yes, Gordon, can you please post that image? I said to Gordon, he has on his email. There's a well-known issue with regards to astrophotography, because astrophotography, when you really get into it, like people like Gordon, Tim, and I'm fairly well into it, becomes kind of pricey. So the joke going around the astronomy clubs, and Gordon's going to open the image and load it up in a moment, but the sharing screen. But the joke is, if you want to keep your kids away from drugs and alcohol, get them into astrophotography, because they'll be broke all their lives.
There we go.
So that's a kind of running joke in astronomy clubs, and especially those into astrophotography.
I teasingly tell people one of the things that you need to start is the name of a good bankruptcy lawyer.
Well, the other thing I would say is this, and once it gets started, 20 years ago when everything was on film, you had to go out and put film in your camera and go out there and you took pictures, and you didn't know for 24 hours, 48 hours when you got the film back if you had anything any good, and it could be a frustrating experience. Here it's all digital. You take a picture, you know pretty quickly whether you've got something. And if you go out here into these software packages and start manipulating and you mess it up, you just go back to the beginning. You haven't broke anything. The way to learn how to do this is just try and fail. Do something that doesn't work, go back and do it again.
And there's lots of books out there and resources out there to help guide you through astrophotography. and to processing your images and the equipment to buy. But before you ever buy any equipment, join an astronomy club. Don't invest any money in any telescope of any form, even just basic visual observing. Join a club, go look at what and look through other people's telescopes, which is kind of hard right now with COVID, but look through other people's telescopes, talk to the astronomers, figure out what they do like, what they don't like. You figure out yourself what you do and don't like to observe, and from there make a decision on, like most clubs have stuff to rent, and when you or even to loan out to members, you would take a loan of equipment, use it for a while, then make your decision about what you want to buy, and then you invest the money in it, because at least then you're investing money and you know what to expect when you're looking through that scope. Not go and buy something off the shelf, set it up, and then let it sit there gathering dust because you're disappointed in what you did not see.
The first two, not one, two telescopes that I bought, I would never have bought had I joined an astronomy club first.
Yeah, join a club, learn from the astronomers, gain data from them, then make your decision. Don't waste money up front, because you may find that you might buy a $5,000 rig and you want to get into astrophotography, and 2 months into it, and you're saying, damn, this is just driving me crazy. I don't want to invest in this. That's why you work with other people first. Then if you want to put in all that work and the learning and you get and understand it, then it's worthwhile investing, because you kind of have an idea of where to go and what's expected out of you, or what the process you have to go through. If you buy blind, clothes need somewhere to hang, We all need somewhere to hang our clothes and hang our coats, I know people who have telescopes out there and they're actually gathering dust, or they are used for coat hangers. Just like that exercise equipment that you bought last Christmas, knowing that you're going to work out really hard in the summer. Yeah, who's used it? Come on, admit it, right? So telescopes are similar to exercise equipment. If they're not used, all they do is gain dust in the corner. Gain knowledge before you go that route. So I don't know if we have anything else to add, guys. Do you?
No, we talked, if anybody had any particular image they wanted to see, we can try and bring something up. But
yeah. So anyone have anything they'd like to bring up? Going once? Going twice? Okay, done. Well, I hope you enjoyed the Astronomy at the Beach 2020. I mistakenly called it many things throughout the last 2 days, but I hope you all enjoyed it, and it was fun for us, and we hope you learned something out of it, and we hope next year we can actually meet in person on the beach with telescopes, and we can have these conversations in person. But still, please share the links, like all of the events, like the YouTube channels, and subscribe, because this channel is that we broadcast on is called Astronomy for Everyone. It's actually a TV show, which some of you saw being recorded live tonight here online. So subscribe to it. Each month there's a brand new show every single month. It's been running for 11 years now, I believe. So there's a lot of episodes out there. It's a new one every single month. So subscribe to the channel, like the channel, help promote us, and we hope you had a good learning experience, or we hope you enjoyed the content, and we hope to see you next year. Thank you and good night.
night all.
Good night. Thank you.